Welcome, everybody. We're going to be, we have a delegation here for one of the consent items, but just wanted to, we have a mover for the consent items. Councillor Gazzola. Does anyone have any questions on any of the, I just got to get the system. Councillor Gazzola?
Well, if the delegation's here for consent item, why don't we let them go first?
It's fine with me.
Yeah, and then I'll cover my question.
Okay,
afterwards.
that's fine. Okay. Well, we do have one of the consent item number 3. We have delegation regarding the on-street parking regulations for Waterloo Street, and I'm not sure, Justin, you want to talk about that before I present it, before I invite the delegates up? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, report 3-1 deals with parking regulation on Waterloo Street. A request from a resident was brought forward to the city to restrict parking on the inside curb portion of Waterloo Street near Shanley. Staff reviewed the parking situation and sightlines and determined that parking should be restricted on that portion of the 65 meters of the roadway in question, and then a subsequent survey was sent out as per our typical parking regulation policy, and we received 9 responses out of 16, which is 56%, and 7 responses were in favor of restricting the parking.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to call upon our delegates, Laurie Shantz and Alexander Kolbus. I just wanted to remind our delegations, you do have 5 minutes to speak. And if your timing is close to about a minute, you'll hear a ring or a ding by the clerk just to let you know that it's time to wrap up. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to speak with you. I guess one of our questions is about what's special about this curve on Waterloo Street. There are other curves on the street that parking is allowed on. So we're not sure why this is happening at this time, why that section of Waterloo Street is considered to be special. And so I guess what we'll do is talk to you about the problems we see with that. And that is that there's very limited parking in the core area of Kitchener. And so when we want to host a dinner party or have our family members come over, there's very limited parking space. And so we would like to keep the parking spaces that are allotted at this time. I think Kitchener has acknowledged the need for parking in the core. I know that in the south end of the city, you've allowed parking on the boulevard, understanding that 2-car driveways really aren't adequate without street parking. So for our own household, we have my elderly mother who lives out of town and comes in to visit, as well as a daughter-in-law who is handicapped and has mobility issues. In order to have them come over, it's important to have parking near our home. Mm-hmm. I'll let Alex speak a little bit about how this impacts his household, but also first I'd like to point out that a number of people who live in our neighborhood, English is not their first language, right. And so a number of them did not respond to your survey, so we're not sure which 16 households you've surveyed. Certainly people who are further from the area don't have as much of a vested interest in maintaining the parking because they wouldn't see any downside. But another advantage we find to parking on the street is that it has a natural traffic calming effect, which we appreciate because it does slow traffic down in our neighborhood. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. I just had my baby girl born Friday. My second
Congratulations.
girl. Thank you. And my parents, as well as a lot of my families, come to visit quite often. And now that the new baby is on board, there'll be more visitations, not only from families but from friends. And I also am a self-proprietor practicing architecture, and I do foresee practicing out of home and having clients park in front of my house would be essential. It would impede my business proposition if that was not allowed. So basically it's from the business perspective, but also from community perspective. Like, we are a very social bunch. We like to interact. We are outside all the time, and being able to park and have our friends and families park is at utmost importance.
Are there any questions
Okay.
that we could speak to?
We do have some questions. Councillor Fernandez, you were buzzed in before. Was it for the delegation, or was it just one of the consent items? Okay. Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask what your addresses are. We have a map here. I just wanted to see.
Yes, actually, our second slide is an aerial view of the neighborhood, if you want to look at it.
Yeah.
I'm at 99.
At 99?
Yeah,
yes.
which is, if you look at that intersection at the bottom and look on the left-hand side, we're the third house down on the left, Alex,
Yeah, and I'm at 95.
which is the one right before.
You have
Yeah.
the numbers there on your map, right?
Also, I should let you know that the gentleman who lives on the far side of my home, so where you see the van there on the street, is Vince. He had shoulder surgery on Friday, so he wasn't able to be here. Also, he's one of the gentlemen for whom English is a second language. And a couple neighbors who we went to see said, no, I didn't return this, but I don't want to change the parking on our street. So they have added their names to a letter that we have here. And Vince is one of those, and Hannah, who lives on the corner right there, is another.
Yeah.
You've made a lot of good points, actually. And I just one question. Do you think if there was an opportunity to hold the vote over again, to talk to all the people, that the figures might change? Right now, there's 7 to 2,
Yeah.
with 7 that haven't responded. So
Do you know, can you tell us which households you surveyed, or?
Just hold on, Justin. Go ahead.
Through the chair, I don't have the information with me, but it's typically, it would be about the 8 houses from the intersection beyond on either side of the street.
On either side, okay. So, some people maybe are going to say it's a nuisance to have parking on the curve if they don't need the parking. I could argue that about down further on Waterloo Street. Wouldn't it be nice if I didn't have to wait for the oncoming traffic to clear before I could go around those parked cars? I think that if we could have a full conversation around this and talk with our neighbors about the implications, I suspect that could change, but I also suspect there would be some who would still agree. I guess my question would be, do all of you want to lose your parking spaces because people who live a bit further afield don't want you parking on your street? And where does that lead us?
thank you. I have a question of staff at some point. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening.
Councillor Marsh.
Thank you so much for coming and making time today out of your busy lives to be here in the afternoon. I want to just ask you, if the parking were allowed on the outside of the curve instead of the inside, which might allow for more visibility, do you think that would still meet your parking needs if it was changed to the other side of the street?
Do you think that would change things, Sarah,
Would that-
as you look? To me, my neighbors, use the parking on our side of the street now when guests arrive and walk across the street. It's a bit further for our daughter-in-law to make it, but that's okay. We would still have on-street parking. I don't know if you want to speak to that, Alex.
Well,
I'm not sure it would change
I'm not sure.
things, but
I'm not sure if it would change anything, and I don't know if it would make any safer or whatever the objective
I'm not
is
sure.
going to be met by
Okay.
by doing that.
Well,
I don't
I'm
think
not-
we understand clearly why the person who complained, unless, you know, the gentleman who lives right across the street from me, I did go to visit their household, and they did say that he's having trouble backing out of his driveway. Now, I don't know that that's the complaint that initiated this, or if he's just agreeing with it because of that. He has backed out and collided with 2 cars, one of which was my daughter's parked there. And, you know, we came to an amicable agreement about how to settle that. So I don't know if that's the reason. And then I don't know if that would change his visibility lines as he's backing out, you know, so I don't know if that would address what the initial concern was. But I think for me, speaking only for my household, the important thing is to have parking nearby for when we have guests and for our quality of life. Now and then we want to juggle cars in and out of our driveway. So is it important to be on one side or the other? I don't think so. I think we would be sorry if we lost more parking spaces, so I don't know if you have as much area in the other curve or not.
Councillor Yaneski?
Yes, 2 or 3 questions, basically. How long have both of you lived there? How many years?
I moved there in 2005, so not quite 10 years.
5 years, I believe, 5 or 6.
It's about, well, I'm speaking to the mic, I couldn't hear you.
Alex, he couldn't hear you.
Oh, 5 years, 5 or 6 years.
Okay, thank you. And do you both have parking in your driveway for how many vehicles?
Yes, we can park, but we can't park side by side or get around without backing into
So
the
it's one
street.
behind the other.
We have room for 2 vehicles in our parking, in our.
Likewise here, I have a row parking, but it's very narrow.
Okay. Is there parking on Shanley Avenue just around the corner?
There's parking down a ways. You can sort of see where vehicles are parked on that picture. But I haven't really looked at how far down. I would like just to comment, though, that those parking slots are well used too, especially in evenings and on weekends. But there is parking allowed on Shanley.
Okay. How much traffic do you have on Waterloo Street? Is there really much, or just local traffic because it looks like it's...
Well, right now with all that's going on Weber Street, we've had more traffic. But normally there's not a lot. We have a lot of bicycle traffic. We also have skateboarders who use that because it is a quieter street. And I believe in the city plans you're going to be closing off the lower end of Waterloo Street on that map when the transit hub gets up. So I think we'll have a lot less traffic on Waterloo Street, and also as Weber with 4 lanes opens up, my hope would be we would only have local traffic.
Okay. I have a question of staff at the appropriate time.
Okay, well, you could have just asked your question because... Okay, Councillor Gazzola? Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry. Councillor Gazzola?
Yeah, I want to ask staff, have we had any incidences on the street that call for us to take this action? Or is it just the request of one person on the street? Has there been any occasions of accidents or?
Through the chair.
Excuse me.
Oops.
You guys can sit down. You don't have to stand up anymore.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry, Justin. Go ahead.
Through the chair, allowing parking on the inside of the curve does not meet our current design guidelines for sight line visibility from an intersection, which is 75 meters. So it being brought forward by the resident group when we've visited the site and looked at it, we support the recommended reduction of parking along the inside of the curb based on it not meeting sightline requirements. we would be open to investigating whether parking was suitable on the other side of the street, because that doesn't impact the sight lines of the intersection.
Yeah, my question goes back. Have we had any incidents up till now because of that?
Through the chair, we have had a number of collisions in that portion of the roadway.
What would be a number? I don't. Is it a serious issue or?
I could get back to you on the specific number. I don't have the file with me.
Thank you. Councillor Yaneski.
Yeah, just two questions, similar to Councillor Gazzola. What are the traffic volumes on that street? I mean, I heard the residents' opinion, but I'm wondering what your comments are.
Through the chair, without having the specific number in front of me, it is quite low on that street, so in the order of about 500 vehicles per day on average.
Okay. And the objector that requested this study, is that one of the 16 that are here or elsewhere in the neighborhood?
Through the chair, they are within this catchment area of 16 houses.
Of the 16. Okay, thank you.
Okay, we have no further questions. Okay.
More of a change of motion, if we can entertain it.
Go
but
ahead.
I should really leave it to the ward councillor if she's interested in making a change. Okay, then I will leave it to the ward councillor.
Okay. Councillor Marsh, you're ready? Sorry, I had clicked you in and then I.
Thanks. It's okay. So yeah, I just want to make a motion when it's time to. Is this the time?
It's time.
Great. So my motion is that we defer to staff to go back, and I think that we do not have enough respondents to the survey. I think 56% is a very. It seems low to me, and only 16 houses received the survey. I also think that we could add to the survey a question about whether or not, if we move the parking to allow for better sight lines for the throughway approaching the intersection, that perhaps we'd come to a stronger consensus among the neighbors.
Okay, before you click off, I'd like to know the timing of your deferral. Yeah, when
Or
do you want
the
this
next,
to come back?
Oh,
do you
let's
want Mr. Reedman to give you a time that is
What
suitable?
would be a suitable time?
Mr.
Yes, Mr. Reedman.
Through the chair, we would need about 3 or 4 weeks to properly engage residents through a survey.
Okay, and since it's approaching the holiday season, let's maybe give a bit more leeway to that. So I'm suggesting that we come back to standing committee the beginning of February, the second week of February. Oh, sorry, the 2nd of February.
So February 2nd?
That would bring it back to a committee meeting.
Okay, February 2nd. Okay, do we have any questions about the timing? All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Okay, so we will be dealing with this again on February 2nd, and I'm sure Councillor Marsh will be in touch with you as well. Thank you. Okay, as for the remaining consent items, do we have any questions? Councillor Gazzola.
A number of questions. The first one is on Aaron Street, and I just wanted to know whether I know that the library apparently was approached. Are there any other stakeholders that should have been approached?
Mr. Reedman?
Through the chair, this is directly adjacent to the library, so they were the main stakeholder that we focused on. This was part of the design work of that portion of Aaron Street, and was intended for a lay-by area for the library.
Okay, does it affect the region?
Through the chair, it does provide access to the service location at the back of the property, but the intent of this is for a short lay-by for access to the library.
Well, okay. I just thought we should contact all the stakeholders. Does it affect the Waterloo Regional Police Services?
Through the chair, this is intended for a lay-by for the library, so it's just a small parking regulation change to meet the design of the street.
Okay, I'm all for public engagement here. Okay, that's fine. On Newberry Drive, I was trying to figure out, this is another one of these curb things, and it said there were 11 people, 11 properties had the right to vote on this. How do we pick those 11 properties? If you look on the map, on the map on 2.3, who are the 11 that get to have a say in this?
Through the chair, it's typically the people on both sides of the street that are affected by the regulation, so within a reasonable distance to where we're looking at the parking change.
Okay, so it doesn't go down the whole street. They're not included, even though they may be the ones that are using the curb.
Through the chair, it's typically assumed that there's enough parking provided on the remainder of the street that we wouldn't survey the whole street. We would just survey affected residents.
Okay, on Bridleworth, everything that comes out says no. you have standards, and they all come out to say no for putting in an all-way stop. So, but we go ahead and say yes. Why is that?
Through the chair,
And just on were the residents there consulted? Because I didn't see anything from residents.
through the chair, we looked at the geometric design guide for Canadian roads, which requires a 75-meter stopping distance, which trumps our all-way stop warrant in this situation. So we feel confident that there's a safety issue located at this intersection and that it wouldn't meet our typical warrant requirements. But because of the visibility issues and pedestrian access, that there's a safety issue at this location which requires the implementation of a stop sign.
So these standards that we use aren't any good.
Through the chair, there's standards for determining whether an all-way stop is warranted, and those are always applied. But if there are safety concerns, that trumps whether an all-way warrant procedure is effective or not.
I thought the standards would have taken safety into account. But then, I find that confusing, that we have standards that don't. On Amherst Drive, there was only a very few number of people responded. Is there any merit on doing a recount on that?
Through the chair,
Yeah, there were 32 possible participants, and only 9 have responded. Sometimes isn't it worth doing a second survey?
Through the chair, when responses are quite low, we typically talk to the ward councillor. This one, there was a strong favor for Proposal A, which was to prohibit the parking, so we did recommend carrying it forward. There is no minimum threshold for survey responses that are required for the parking standard, and we do typically talk to the ward councillor if there's a handful of responses.
All right. That's fine. I'm not getting anywhere.
Okay, just in time. Councillor Fernandez.
Thanks. Just so you know, Councillor Gazzola, the number of residents on that street are 99% of them are landlords, and so the reality is that we have an overabundance of student parking on that street, and that's one of the reasons why we're trying to avoid continuous student parking on the street, which starts to affect the street and the pedestrian. There is no sidewalks there, so.
What you're doing is being a little more liberal.
Yeah, well, we're changing the time to coincide with the school hours. Okay. My question was also about the Brattlewreath Street and Mountain Laurel, only because I thought that we don't usually use all all-way stops as traffic control measures, but you're saying that it's sightline and not a speed issue.
Mr. Eben.
Through the chair, yes, we do not use all-way stops for traffic calming purposes. This is an issue with respect to the sightlines for a pedestrian or a vehicle crossing the street. They're not able to see in time for the other driver to make a decision. So.
Yeah, I can see that. Well, unfortunately, you put a big stop in front of the... maybe you should have put the stop a little higher so that we can see the curvature, which I think is the issue here, that people can't see beyond that. I guess this also, if I just make a quick comment, this speaks to something that we were talking about this morning with regard to the development industry building in appropriate traffic calming or constructing roads so that we don't have to do a reactive situation, which this is a very good example of a reactive. Had this been maybe the curve been done a different way, we would have had a better sight line. So it's just a comment.
Councillor Yaneski?
Just getting back to the questioning that Councillor Gazzola had on the notification of the property owners, looking at two of the applications that we have before us, the one on Amherst, it seems to be a straight street. We got 32 property owners notified, of which looks like about 16 on either side. Seems reasonable. Yet you look at the Newberry one, and there's 11. Yet when I look at the impact, the one lot at 271 is one property owner on one side. Then if you take the back property line and the side yard and extend it across the street, you've got 11 houses on the other side. So I'm just trying to understand, if you're doing both sides of the street, how many numbers and where do you start and where do you finish, especially on a curve of the road that affects one property, and then on the other side you got 11 ones that sort of have that same frontage. I don't understand where the rationale and where your start and finish is.
Mr. Eben?
Through the chair, the properties on the opposite side of the parking restriction have limited parking in front of them because they are on a curve, so the front of their property is a lot narrower than the back of their property.
That's right.
So they're impacted a little bit more, but on the straightaway sections, there's a lot more opportunity for vehicles to park because the driveway and their front yard takes up a lot less space. If you look at the other example, we were looking at changing the regulation on the entire street, so we surveyed the entire street for that one on report number 2.
The other street being Amherst, you mean?
Yes, Amherst.
Yeah, well, I understand that, and that's a straight street, and that's an issue in itself. They've got two sort of different issues. One's a student parking issue, whereby this one is the curvature of the road and trying to make the turn, especially there. So I do agree with you on the outer side of Newberry Drive. Then the front lots are narrower, and there's hardly any parking just because the driveway width to get in doesn't allow for any parking there, just by the logistics of it. But my question still to you that hasn't been answered is how many people would be circulated on one side and how many would be circulated on the other side? You're saying 6.
Sorry,
that doesn't make sense.
Through the chair, this one would be about 10 or 9. I don't have the file in front of me on the far side of the street, and 1 or 2 on the inside of the curve.
And that's what I would gather. And I think the people who are on a section of the street that are from, let's say, on the north side, from 258 to 276 roughly, and the two properties on the south side, 119 and 271, are the ones that are probably be using that curve all the time because they're coming in or out, and they're the ones that are affected in terms of driving their vehicle, plus the person who lives on the corner too, at 271.
Through the chair, that's correct.
Okay, I'm just trying to establish numbers as to where, how you approach it. Thank you.
Councillor Galloway Seelock.
Yeah, I just want to encourage everyone to support the report number 4. As the ward councillor, I am fully aware of the situation and encouraged by the residents to look at this as an option because the sightline is a huge issue. You also have to look at it in the context of the subdivision and the environmental features that are there. There's a large hill that comes down right to where that four-way stop needs to be. There has been a number of accidents there, narrowly missing pedestrians. A telephone pole has been taken out. A fence has been taken out. So there's a number of reasons why we need to look at this. And every other intersection along that street has a four-way stop, and this is the only anomaly there that doesn't have one, and therefore that is why there's a lot of confusion when it comes to, because people are assuming it's a four-way stop, but it's not a four-way stop. And I appreciate staff's work on this. We've looked at it a few times in different contexts, but I really believe that having spoken to the residents, that they want to see this always stop there for safety of cars, pedestrians, and for their front lawns.
Mayor Verbanovich.
Thank you. Just a couple quick questions with respect to number 7 and the noise exemption. I know this is somewhat routine, but what seems a little less routine is that it's being suggested that we grant it for a 4-year period as opposed to doing it on an annual basis. And just wondering what the rationale is for that, and would it not be better to keep it to a year so that if we do have problems, we'd have at least a little bit of a carrot in our dealings with the MTO on any issues?
Through the chair, for larger projects, we do typically grant a longer period. So we have a few different MTO projects that have a 2 or 3 year window. It's sometimes challenging for the MTO to schedule and know when their activities are coming up. So granting the longer period does allow for some flexibility in their scheduling.
So there have been others where we've done a longer period?
Through the chair, that's correct.
Okay. And how have they been lately with any issues? I know when we were doing the Highway 8 expansion, there were some residents that we were dealing with on an ongoing basis there. How's that been working out more recently?
Through the chair, that one does affect more residential properties because they do back right onto Highway 8. This one has a lot more distance between the work areas and potentially affected residents. There have been a couple of noise issues associated with some bridge work that happened on the Highway 8 project where we've dealt with the contractor and connected them with the citizen making the complaint.
So they've been addressed?
Through the chair, that's correct.
Okay. I think just from a comment point of view, I know that staff are often reluctant to look at all-way stop traffic controls as potential solutions for some of the traffic issues. But as I think all of us know in the recent election, these kinds of traffic issues are probably the number one thing we heard about as we went door to door. So I'm happy to see that in this particular, both of these sets of circumstances, staff are being open to looking at it, even though it is for different reasons than just traffic calming, but that there's sightline issues as well that are at play here.
Okay, Councillor Gazzola, is this for?
Well, yeah, I had
clarification?
a question on the noise one, but I thought that was a different person that dealt with those, and obviously not. My concerns was also with the 4-year period. It's an awful long time. I have a question. Once we grant an exemption, do we have any opportunities to deal with it again? And for that, and I don't think we do. And for that reason, I would have preferred to see a shorter term. I mean, it can be renewed very easily, but as opposed to giving away the store before we have an opportunity.
Care to respond to that, Mr. Reardon?
Through the chair, contractors tend to schedule their quieter activities within the evening hours where possible. We also have to balance the need for keeping traffic flow on the 401 because it is a major RTO roadway within the province. But there are other legislation that does apply to noise guidelines, and there are protocols that are in place outside of the council procedure that still deal with those noise issues.
The question I actually had written down here is, do we have any choice? And you're telling me we have no choice. Let's go ahead and approve it. I would have thought that we do have a choice, and I don't argue with what you say. Yes, life has to go on and things have to move on. I'm just saying, do we have to give a 4-year approval here? A lot can happen in 4 years, and once we give an approval, it's gone.
Okay, well, staff are suggesting a 4-year term, so if you want, you can put forward a motion to...
I will do that.
You will do that?
I will move a 1-year approval.
Okay. Okay, we have one more question. Councillor Marsh?
Yeah, actually, it's already been addressed by Councillor Gazzola. Thank you.
Okay. So we will deal with items 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Item number 7 on the motion to do a 1-year term. Are all those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Okay, that's the end of the consent items. We have discussion items number 8, dealing with the Boulevard Parking Program, and Mr. Turner is going to be presenting the report. Go ahead, Mr. Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll go back to the spring of 2013 when staff presented a report to council relating to some temporary parking options for residents. And coming out of that, 2 pilot programs were approved, one relating to suspending enforcement of the 3-hour parking time limit overnights from April to November, as well as implementing for the months of December to March a pilot program to allow for boulevard parking in the Ward 5 area, subject to conditions. The Ward 5 area, as indicated in that original report, was identified as a ward that has a somewhat higher percentage of smaller lot frontages, which can impact available parking. For both pilot programs, direction was given to staff to report back, and staff did report back in the spring with regard to the 3-hour enforcement program and received council direction. So we're now reporting back on the Boulevard Parking Program with respect to how to move forward for this winter and perhaps beyond. And as a reminder, when we talk about boulevard parking, we're talking about parking on the paved portion of the boulevard between the sidewalk and the road, and subject to conditions. And those conditions relate to ensuring that vehicles do not overhang sidewalks or impact the roadway or otherwise impact the grassed area of those boulevards. I can tell you that during the last winter, the last 4 months of December to the end of March, the parking was, boulevard parking was permitted in Ward 5, and it was enforced in all the other wards, but only on a complaint basis. The report indicates a number of stats relating to the complaints and tickets that were issued from December to March compared to our 5-year average. The number of complaints received last winter was just over 50% of the 5-year average, so 23 versus 43 being the 5-year average. The number of tickets, however, was significantly decreased. Just over 6 times less tickets issued in that 4-month period from compared to the 5-year average, 42 tickets versus 277 tickets as a 5-year average. So staff monitored the feedback, knowing that it was a pilot program. We paid attention to the feedback received during the 4-month duration of the program, and we found that the majority of the feedback was positive. Residents were appreciative of the fact that they had parking options to ensure that they could get their vehicles off the streets during the winter months. I also understand through a brief discussion with the ward councillor that Councillor Galloway-Sealock did receive some feedback from her residents directly to her office, and it's my understanding that the majority of that feedback was positive as well. In talking with staff in other divisions, it was identified that there were no operational concerns related to snow removal. And as a reminder, if vehicles parked on a boulevard create problems for snow removal or other operational issues, then staff have the ability to take enforcement action based on the criteria that we have put in place. So it's staff's position that permitting vehicles to park on a boulevard area subject to the conditions as mentioned in the report is a viable option to help reduce the number of vehicles that we find on the city streets during the winter months. Going forward, the staff or the report identifies two potential options for council to consider: to implement the boulevard parking program for the winter months citywide, or maintain the status quo of just permitting it in the Ward 5 area with what we would say would be a reactive measure for the other 8 wards. Staff do believe that that it is a viable option for all 9 wards in the city. We've also indicated what the potential financial implications are, and assuming that there is some form of boulevard parking permitted either in Ward 5 or citywide, the financial implications are estimated at between $6,000 and $7,000. And that's a summary of the report, Mr. Chairman, and I'm available for questions, as is Mr. Reedman.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Turner. We do have several questions for you. Councillor Galloway-Seelock.
Yeah, if you can just indulge me for 1 quick minute, I'll just give my brief summary because it was the pilot project that was in the ward I represent. And once we got the rules out there of what was allowed and what wasn't allowed, which took a little bit of time and a little bit of education to the community, it really was a positive uptake. And I've reached out a number of times to the Ward 5 residents, and again, just recently in the Kitchener Citizen, and have received feedback. And it's all geared towards let's do this again. Let's make sure this happens in Ward 5. And that's where I'm here to encourage today. But I'm willing to listen to the discussion. I'm prepared to. I have a question, but I'm prepared to remove the recommendation. But if the rest of council doesn't want to go there across the city, I would have strong comments towards at least continuing in Ward 5. The one question, though, I do have, because I just think the one chart on page 8-3 is a little bit deceiving. We used to actively enforce this bylaw across the city. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, yes. There were, particularly in the wintertime, there was some proactive enforcement of boulevard parking when we had identified concerns for on-street parking. So there was it was a combination of things. It wasn't totally proactive at all times, but there were time periods, depending on the weather, where it would be proactive, particularly during the 4-month winter period.
Right. So if a bylaw officer was driving by, saw someone parked on the boulevard, they could potentially ticket at that point, right? Is that correct?
That's correct.
Right. So some of those numbers, I just want to make it clear, the decrease in the number of tickets issued wasn't directly related to Ward 5, but rather a new approach that we've taken with bylaw, where it became the rest of the city other than Ward 5 was enforced on a complaint basis. That's more of probably the explanation between the difference in those numbers.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize if it wasn't clear, but that the decrease in numbers in that chart is related to the 2 factors, an exemption in Ward 5 and complaint only in the other 8 wards. So I do apologize if that wasn't clear, but that's absolutely what we're basing it on.
It may have been clear. I just wanted to make sure that it was out there and really clear, because
Yes.
it does look. It could potentially look like Ward 5 was a really, really big problem, but I think it's a good report. And again, I'm open. I'm prepared to move it, but if the rest of council or committee is not willing to do that citywide, I would be prepared to move that motion with respect to Ward 5.
Your motion's taken. We do have lots on the board here, so please be succinct as possible. Councillor Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll try my best. Part of my question, Councillor Galloway-Seelock asked, so which is good. It gives us a bit of a better overview, objective view of what the difference has really been on the impact on ticketing. But as part of the recommendation for it to be citywide, I'm focusing more on boulevard parking. Has there been much of an ask by the community outside of Ward 5? I don't know if staff have received any comments. I personally can't say. I've had too much conversation with residents in the ward I represent, but I just want to hear if staff received comments from members from outside of Ward 5 or citizens from outside of Ward 5.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I can give you anecdotal information based on our discussions with the staff that received the complaints through our call center and through our front desk at bylaw enforcement. And there were questions from time to time about, why can't we have this in our ward? So a few comments or a few questions that way. The response back to those people was that it would be a pilot project and would be considered again. My information's anecdotal, Councillor Singh. I can say there was some inquiries, but I unfortunately I can't put a number on it.
Okay, and was that numerous, these inquiries?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, if I had to speculate, I would say it was probably less than 20.
Okay, all right. And the last question would be for even administering in Ward 5 where this was allowed, especially in the wintertime, large snowfall for snow clearing. Were there any instances where bylaw was called in that aspect because difficulties of snow clearing the roadway because there was a vehicle parked on the boulevard and that would block the vehicle? Any issues like that arising with snow clearing through our operations? I don't know if operations can answer, but I'm guessing if bylaw was called to deal with that situation.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I can't specifically recall any particular instance where we would have ticketed a car that otherwise would have been exempt. If we had complaints that the vehicle was creating an operational issue, it would have been because it was overhanging the road, the sidewalk, or the grass. So my recollection of last year was that those types of concerns were few and far between because of our heavy winter. Of course, the edge of the snowbank in some cases were 2 to 3 feet away from the boulevard. Certainly the sidewalk issue would be an issue. So I think some people were challenged just to get their vehicles onto the boulevard, but if they were able to, it resulted in really no operational concerns.
And that's absolutely true, but we're dealing with, and that's why this problem is so much more compounded. We're dealing with very narrow lots and narrow driveways, so that in itself, not many opportunities to even park parallel or vertically on the boulevard, whereas if we were to go across the board, citywide, that may be much more of an issue that becomes a lot more of a problem for operations. So regardless of whichever way this discussion goes, obviously this would be ratified in council. I would love to be able to get some feedback from operations to hear if there were any issues that arise in dealing with snow clearing on streets in Ward 5 due to the boulevard parking. But quick comment, just because I don't want to worry Councillor Galway-Seelock, very supportive of carrying this on in Ward 5, though. So,
Mr. Whitmer, care to respond?
Through you, Mr. Chair. I asked specifically our front operations staff if this was an issue, because I wanted to make sure that it wasn't, and they indicated that they did not have any issues associated with vehicles parked on the edge of the driveway. And that's the first question in mind: does it impede snow? Yes, it does, but people do recognize that when the plow goes by and fills a nice little windrow beside their vehicle, that's the first thing they're going to have to do in order to shovel out, in order to get their car actually out of the driveway. So it doesn't reduce the amount of snow going in the end, it just piles it up in a neater section at the end of the driveway. So we haven't had any complaints about that, and it doesn't seem to have impacted our service delivery.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, does this come under the Highway Traffic Act, parking on boulevards?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, no, it does not. The Municipal Act and the Highway Traffic Act are the two acts that we use that grant us the authority to enact parking regulations, but it's purely a municipal jurisdiction as to whether or not we're going to allow parking on a boulevard.
Okay, so we're not going against the highway traffic?
No, sir.
Yeah, just, I was a little confused on some of the figures. Like on page 8.3, you talk about the complaints and the tickets. Is that for the whole city, or just for Ward 5?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the chart on page 8.3 is for the entire city. And again, I apologize if that wasn't made clear in the report.
Well, somewhere, for example, on 8.7, which is a previous report, you talk about 930 tickets issued in 2012. Was that for boulevard parking, or was that for the 3-hour parking? On 8.7.
That's for. That is, I think, is for the 3-hour parking. If it's on 8.7, it would be regarding
Through you, Mr. Chairman, yes. And I also believe that that may have, those particular, that particular issue may have related to the entire city as opposed to, or the entire year as opposed to the 4-month period.
Okay. And then somewhere on 8-9, you talk about in 2012 being 692 complaints. Again, is that for the 3-hour parking?
Yes, in that section, there were 692 complaints in 2012, and again, that would be for the entire 12-month season, 12-month year.
Oh, for the entire. Do you have figures for 2013 and 2014 that compare to that?
For the 3-hour limit or the boulevard?
Yeah, that compare to the 692 complaints.
I don't have that information in front of me since this report is focusing on boulevards and not the 3-hour limit, sir.
Okay, I was confused as to whether we were dealing with both issues.
Yeah, and I apologize. The original report was, when we brought it forward in the spring of 2013, related to both issues. The previous report in earlier this spring related to the 3-hour. So after the pilot projects were implemented, we split the two reporting mechanisms back.
Okay, so here we're dealing strictly with the boulevard parking.
That's correct,
right?
sir.
Okay, just going back to that though, when we did it originally, you circulated other departments, divisions in the city, and our planning department had a lot of concerns, or seemed to have a lot of concerns. There was a big paragraph as to what planning were saying about it, about this boulevard parking. I'm just curious as to what their comments are today.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I'll be upfront in saying that I didn't have a lengthy consultation with planning over this, moving this citywide. Again, we were focusing on the feedback that was received operationally in the field. So between now and the next council meeting, if you wish, I can solicit some comments from planning, but it, quite frankly, did not come up as an area of focus during this particular review.
Yeah, I would like to hear that because they did have some concerns, and it was really more to do with across the city as to the particular case in Ward 5. So I would be good to hear when we deal with this next Monday as to what their comments are today and if they've mellowed any or changed any. Yeah. Other than that, I can support. From a hearing that we don't, just a quick comment, that we don't have any problems in Ward 5, that it's worked out well, that's fine. I find it hard. I would have thought operations would have had a problem, because I know on our street they collect all the snow and dump it into my ramp. What would you do if I had a car parked there? It's okay. It's food for thought. Thank you.
Councillor Davey.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Ioannidis. My question, I have two questions. First, was much public input received outside of Ward 5?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I alluded to that briefly in answering Councillor Singh in that the information's anecdotal. Because we were only enforcing on a complaint basis and the complaints were down from previous years and the tickets were down, we did not receive a significant amount of feedback, but the feedback that we did receive in some cases was, well, why can't we do that? And why can't we do this in our ward? And that's where we were indicating to them that we would be bringing it back to council. In terms of strict numbers, those numbers weren't tracked. The information that I received comes from most of the requests that and telephone inquiries that came directly to our bylaw enforcement information staff.
Okay, so presumably if there was, let's say hypothetically there was a large portion of the population that was concerned with, say, the aesthetics of people parking on the boulevards, we wouldn't have done any sort of consultation, have any information based on that?
Not unless there was a significant input from a particular group, but there was no specific set of inputs that came in from, say, a neighborhood or a stakeholder group. Okay. Most of the conversations were one-offs with area residents.
If we were to approve it, would there be any concern? I guess my concern is going straight from Ward 5, which is very different, I would say, and I think Councillor Galloway-Seelock would agree, from many of the other wards in the city, to extending it as a pilot for a year for the rest of the city to gain that feedback. There'd be no concern there from staff.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, that would not be a concern. We did suspect that might be a request anyway.
Okay. Last question. Any property that doesn't support the appropriate width on their boulevard for a vehicle wouldn't be permitted to park a car there. So my other concern, in the fullness of time, trying to imagine the worst case scenarios here, is there any concern, or what rules do we have in place to ensure people with single car driveways in going forward aren't paving over a portion of their boulevard so they do have that winter parking option?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the approach we take with in terms of widening driveways that extend out onto the roadway, our zoning bylaw regulates the driveway widths, and the practice that we follow is that the outside of a small flare at the bottom of the driveway or bottom of the apron that meets the roadway, we look at restricting. And again, it's not a regulation. It's certainly something that could be looked at, but at this point, the guideline is to match up the driveway apron with the driveway itself, knowing that the driveway itself is what's regulated.
Okay, so I can imagine a situation in the future where, say, a home is duplexed and there's a single driveway entrance, and the owner of the home has actually gone out and already done that. They've paved over a section of their boulevard to make a second parking spot there for the winter months. And there was a complaint came in, so would staff suggest that or enforce them to return it to its original state then, I guess is my question.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, that would be the intended approach, knowing, of course, that the boulevard itself is city property, so we do have a measure of control over it. The other thing I can tell you is that between us and transportation planning, and the legal department, we're currently looking at a set of boulevard maintenance regulations and work permit regulations within a roadway that will be coming before council. At this point, we don't have a target date to bring it before council, but I can certainly build into that review the concerns that are expressed today.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chair, I would only indicate that I would be requesting or amending that this be a pilot for the city for the first year.
You mean for the remaining of the city?
For everything, for the remainder of the city, everything but Ward 5.
Councillor Fernandez.
Thank you. So with Councillor Davies' amendment in mind, I certainly feel a little bit better about supporting this throughout the city, because in my ward I've got a lot of different challenges with the student parking. So I would be really, really concerned about us, especially we just talked about the Amherst area, but that whole area struggles with parking and parking every which way and up, backwards, inside out, literally. So I would be concerned. I think Ward 5 is definitely a unique situation, and I was absolutely going to support that. So might reluctantly support the idea of doing it throughout the city and seeing what's going to happen. My question is, we do a lot of monitoring out in the college area. Do you foresee additional challenges should we implement this across the city?
Mr. Turner?
To you, Mr. Chairman, additional challenges in terms of increased enforcement?
Yes.
I don't believe so. We didn't see that with the pilot in Ward 5. In fact, in some areas, there was less efforts needed for our officers to monitor the boulevard parking because the complaints were down and the ticket issuance was down. So certainly there will be times when we'll receive calls and we'll have to go out and assess as to whether or not the parking is impacting the criteria that we've outlined, but I don't see it as being not manageable.
Okay. The reason I asked that, I'm thinking specifically about some of the very, very wide driveways that we have and how unsightly it starts to get when you've got 8 cars parked in a driveway and they're parked right up to the garage and then they're parked right out to the edge of the street. we're going to have to probably do some engagement or at least some citizen information so that the people in that area understand that this is right now a pilot project throughout the city, right? Would you agree? Because we already get a lot of complaints from that area as it is, and I'm just wondering if we're setting ourselves up for a lot of additional complaints.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, in certain areas in the Lower Dune areas, there are certain streets where there are no sidewalks, so that people are already parking right out to the roadway since we don't have an identified boulevard, and that's permitted. So we're really talking about the areas where it's a paved portion between the sidewalk and the road. So I think those are easier to monitor, and I also think that we can identify those streets, and certainly we can look for some form of public engagement. Certainly we have good contacts in the neighborhood in and around Lower Dune in terms of getting that messaging out.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Councillor Yaneski.
I don't have any comments, but I don't have any questions, but I just have comments. You want them now, or?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, I'm prepared to support the citywide. I think it's a good objective. I've had some residents in my area ask for it as well. More of curiosity that some of them maybe have some more vehicles than they normally would, and are looking for that. And I know certain streets also in my ward don't have much of a boulevard, so you can only get maybe a half a car. So I know that'll eliminate them right off the start and make it impossible. But for those areas that it can work, I'm prepared to support it. I'm in agreement for the pilot project citywide, just to see if there is any impact and any concerns that may be raised over the years. So I'm prepared to support it.
Councillor Etherington.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I would just say that, yeah, I like the idea of the pilot project. I think we should look at it. But I had a couple of questions for Mr. Turner. As part of that pilot project, could we... I'm sympathetic toward the planning comments on page 8-8. And I wanted to ask whether we could, as part of that monitoring, look at any instance of damage to boulevards or complaints in that particular area. In other words, negative impacts on the appearance of communities, but particularly the damage to boulevards, because I think there is going to be some. And so I would like to know if that is happening as part of that pilot project. Is that possible?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, it certainly is possible. I will ask our staff to ensure that they keep an eye out for that. And the truth is that if there's any damage to the boulevard area, that would mean that the parking is in contravention of the criteria that we've laid out, which means that there would be enforcement, and we would continue to follow up until that enforcement issue was resolved. But certainly in terms of looking at damage that is directly attributed to this boulevard parking, we'll talk to staff and ask them to keep an eye out for that. I can tell you again, last year, just simply because of all the snowbanks, it was very difficult for vehicles to encroach on grassed areas when they could fit inside the boulevard. So I'm not aware of any significant concerns with damage, but as indicated earlier, I will be speaking with planning prior to next council meeting, and will ensure that staff are paying attention to the boulevard damage potential.
And I would certainly support the pilot project and what is happening in Ward 5. I'm just boggled that we ever got into this narrow lot nightmare in Ward 5 before the year 2000. I'm astounded that happened. That's a comment, I guess.
Okay. Councillor Singh, you're buzzed in.
Yeah, I had a quick question, but I think from the comments earlier, I think, or what I've heard so far, it probably wouldn't make much sense. But I was going to ask staff that, was there any rationale given to perhaps phasing this in instead of doing it citywide, and closing in a few extra wards this year and seeing what would happen as to the number of complaints or issues? Because, again, Ward 5 has been a matter of necessity, and now we're extending beyond where it may not be. It's more of a matter of convenience. And so there may be a lot more neighborhood disputes because of this. So that was my question of staff. Was that considered? Or?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, that was considered as part of our review team.
Were there any
concern, of
particular
course-
wards also considered as a phase-in process, or?
Sorry, in terms of phasing it in, what our concern was, we hadn't identified specific wards to phase in terms of actual the ward numbers, but we did consider the potential of having certain wards throughout the city allowed and other wards not allowed. And we were concerned from an enforcement and communications standpoint. In factoring all those things in, we landed more on the side of saying if it does go citywide, we could certainly support a one-year pilot to work through it.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
I have one quick question. To Mr. Turner. Mr. Turner, has it been staff's perspective that they were anticipating that this may lead to a rollout to the entire city, that they've been kind of just been lenient in the other wards?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I can tell you that I'm not sure that I would say that they were lenient in the other wards. We actually gave staff direction to say that we would only deal with boulevard parking on a complaint basis. So it actually comes from a direction from our management team to say that we didn't want to be on opposite sides of the spectrum in terms of a parking exemption and proactive in the other areas. So we tried to meet somewhere in the middle.
Okay, so somewhat we've already been kind of doing it already, in a way, in essence. Yes. Okay. Councillor Galloway, you prepared to make comments?
Yeah, I just have
your motion?
Quick comment, and I just want to be clear on the motion with Councillor Davies' amendment brought forward. I think that having gone through this last year and bylaw and I would say communication staff put a good effort together to really educate and to develop some really good communication pieces for the community. And so I think it would just be a tool that we already have that we can roll out citywide if this should pass. I think when I look at the planning comments, and while I disagree with planning on a few occasions with regards to aesthetics, I've done that a few times in my 8 years, I believe that safety and practicality has to be an issue that we have to look at. And I think when you start thinking of, especially in a Christmas season, when you're having parties or guests over, that they need a place to park as well. And sometimes it'll just be one-offs, and sometimes, in the case of Ward 5, it's they need it for the majority of those winter months. So I think it helps with convenience. You'll see that some will use it on a regular basis, some will just need it on a weekend or when their university student is home or whatever the case may be. But we do have a good plan. As Mr. Turner said, there didn't appear to be much damage on the boulevards. It didn't come across as a concern this past year with my experience. So I'm encouraged to see where this is going. I just want to be clear, though, with the motion that we can move forward with the staff recommendation in Ward 5 in each year, so we don't have to continue to look at it, because it really has been a positive experience that I've had with the residents in Ward 5, and that the pilot then just be for the other 9 wards. I just want to make sure that that's what Councillor Davies' intent was, and that's what ends up in the record. I don't know exactly how to word that, but if we can make sure that that's clear and that's what we're voting on, then I am fully supportive of moving in that direction.
Councillor Singh?
Yeah, I'll be brief, Mr. Chair. I think this is a testament to our staff as well as to how flexible we can be to counter a problem that obviously we were dealing with. Our residents were, had difficulty in finding reasonable avenue of parking and accommodating for guest parking as well. And I'm relating to this to Ward 5, and it's encouraging that we went this direction, that we did this pilot project dedicated to there, and now simply from what Councillor Galloway-Seelock herself has said, that this is something that's been really embraced by the community, and they are, this is something that's now just a standard, which I'm very supportive of. And I hope that the motion that Councillor Davey has put forward, that can be split in 2 ways, because I don't want to in any way deter that proceeding from Ward 5. So I'm very supportive of that, and I will support that when the motion comes. But when it comes to a citywide rollout, I'm cautious, because this is very abrupt. We did have this conversation last year when we brought this out, but I haven't really seen to be comforted by a full-on public consultation where the residents have been engaged to see if this is really a want by them. We think this is a good idea for them, but we don't really know if they have really referred that and think the same way. And that's why I'm a little cautious to support a citywide rollout prior to a public consultation. Most things that can be as impactful as this will be, and it will be aesthetically, it will be. It's quite different than what we've allowed in our community visually. So I think it would have been better to have that public dialogue, which we did not. And I think as we carry on what's in Ward 5, I would prefer it for more of a public engagement to proceed before we were to do a full citywide allowance for boulevard parking. So for that reason, I can't support it, and that's one of the reasons why I had asked, had we considered doing just few additional wards to see what that impact could be. So it could be a lot more sensitive. Rather than impacting the entire city. So reluctantly, I can't support the 1-year trial citywide boulevard parking, but I will very pleasingly support for Ward 5.
Okay. Councillor Grzula, you made comments already, or you want to add anything additional? Okay.
You're very attentive towards me. Very good. I just wanted to suggest why we don't have 2 votes, one clearly for Ward 5, putting it in place and dealing with that. Because I too have concerns about, very similar to Councillor Singh. And I do want to support Ward 5 where it's been tried, it's proven and everything. But I'm not sure on the other, and I would have liked to consider voting no against it. But and that might have hurt the other. So my only comments are, why don't we divide it into two separate recommendations?
That's fine. We can do that.
Okay. And then and then have a recorded vote on it.
Okay. So I have no further questions or comments. I think I just want to commend staff on looking at this on a broader issue and not just Ward 5 as well, because I think there is some concerns throughout the city, and in addition, I think this is a route that will eventually solve some other concerns, parking concerns, in particular residents who don't like cars being parked in front of their house. So I think that could solve that problem, and I think Mr. Vendros understands what I'm talking about, because I've been dealing with that for a few places now. But anyways, it's been called a recorded vote. And we'll do the first on Councillor Galloway's motion on Councillor Galloway Seelock's. Sorry, I just got Ward 5 ongoing and no longer a pilot program. Okay. Councillor Fernandez?
Oh, sorry, that was excellent.
Okay. So recorded vote. That's been voted upon unanimously. As far as the remainder. Can I ask one question of staff? Okay, hold on. I accidentally removed everybody from the system. Go ahead, Councillor Grzula.
I had asked when I was going through the questions if I could hear from planning as to what their comments are now. Are we going to hear that by next Monday when this comes back for ratification? So I could vote one way today and still have the opportunity when I hear to change. Okay.
Okay. So as for the second portion, to have this rolled out as a pilot program to the city, rest of the city, for 1 year. That's what the amendment is. And is that a recorded vote as well? Yes. All those in favor, please stand up. Opposed? That's carried. Next item of business is item number 9, Activa Holdings Inc. drainage petition. And we have Ms. Cooper to present staff report. That's all part of it. That was part of it. Was it? That was part of it, yeah. That was part of the recommendation. Yeah. Ms. Cooper?
3, Mr. Chair, I'll just do a brief overview of the events that have occurred to date, which is outlined in the staff report. In 2008, the city received a zone change application for the proposed property. It would go from an existing agricultural land use to proposed residential and open space. The developer is proposing to develop 40 townhomes on this property. As part of the zone change application, the city made a condition to secure a legal outlet which was to be created on the property and an agreement be formed with adjacent landowners. To date, no agreement has been made. On August 22nd, the city received a petition under the Drainage Act to secure a legal outlet from the subject property. This staff report that's in front of you deals with the legal outlet as it pertains as a condition of the zone change application. Staff met with the affected landowners on September 11th to outline the overall process involved with a drainage petition under the Drainage Act, as well as identifying the next steps in the process if council does decide to proceed ahead with the petition. I will note at that meeting, there was no stakeholders present that were opposed to creating the legal outlet, and we have not heard to date of any opposition as well. If council does decide to proceed with the drainage petition and instructs staff to process it, then under the Drainage Act, a third-party engineer is required to be obtained to create the engineer's report. The engineer's report will outline the recommendations on the legal outlet that will be constructed, as well as taking into consideration all design aspects, including the wetlands and the woodlot. The cost for this report and for the construction of the outlet would be the sole cost of the developer, and the developer has agreed to such. As outlined in the report, it's staff's recommendation that council decide to proceed with the drainage petition and instruct staff to process it, and further that staff retain an engineering consultant to complete the third-party engineer's report as required under the Drainage Act.
Okay, thank you. We have a few questions for you. Councillor Galloway-Seelock.
I just wanted to ask if there's any delegations that are coming forward on this at all. If they plan, I see Larry's here from Activa. Are you just here to answer any questions? I'm not sure who some of my questions may be directed at, I guess. Okay. The lectern on in the bottom right-hand corner.
Bottom right-hand corner. There?
Yes, sorry. I have nothing further to add to the staff report. Activa is in support, and we're just simply here to monitor discussion.
Okay. I may have a question for you if you'll indulge at the end, but I'll ask staff first, and if they can't answer. Thanks, Larry. Linda, you said that there's no opposition to this application from a homeowner's or a resident's perspective in the area. Then I struggle with why is there no agreement that's been made if there's been meetings and with affected homeowners, but there's no agreement, but there's no opposition. Why are we at this point? Why are we at this stalemate?
3, Mr. Chair. In reference to my comment, there's no opposition. That was in support of the stakeholders who were present at the meeting. I can't speak to everyone in the surrounding circulation boundary. The city is not privy to the talks between the adjacent landowner. They did mention to us in the meeting, and we do have on file, that they're not opposed to it. They just want to make sure that the actual outlet is legally defined on paper and on title as it should be, because there's no riparian rights, because there's no existing water course present. So the adjacent landowner just wants to make sure that the proper protocol is followed by creating this outlet and defining one.
Okay, I'm not sure that fully answers what I'm trying to get at, but have we ever dealt with a drainage petition before?
Not that we've been involved in.
So how do we get to this point?
Ms. McDonald?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. I'd assume it's because of the discussions that went on between the impacted property owners and Activa as the party that's trying to create the legal outlet. If they're not able to reach a decision mutually between themselves, then this is a process that's allowed by statute, and they're electing to go under this process.
And we know that those discussions have occurred to try and reach an agreement before we go this route. Do we know that?
Yeah, we've been advised that those talks have happened.
By who?
By the property owner.
Have we engaged with the surrounding residents at all to see if there's been the dialogue's two ways versus just knowing that one party is saying that?
No, we've not been party to that.
Here's my concern. It's part comment. Maybe there might be a question at the end. It's the first that I'm learning of it as the ward councillor, and there doesn't seem, it's the first time we're dealing with something like this. Well, there was a meeting. I wasn't included in that meeting. The residents are obviously not in agreement with what's going on, or haven't been able to make an agreement. And so I'm concerned that we're going down this road with something that's completely new, and that we're going to have to understand at the developer's costs to hire an engineer to come forward. And I think it's a new process, and I think I would like to have an opportunity to at least engage the residents in the area to see where we're at before we move forward with this. I'll come forward with some sort of recommendation, likely deferral at some point, but I'd like to allow the discussion to happen with the rest of committee at this time.
Okay. Councillor Fernandez.
Thank you. Have we engaged any conversation about this Drainage Act with our regional counterparts in terms of the hydrology experts that we have there, Don Corbett and Eric Hodgkins?
No, the region wasn't party to our talks.
Why not?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the city was just meeting with affected landowners that the outlet would be created over their lands. The GRCA would be circulated through the engineer's report, and they would be involved in the detailed design if that proceeded ahead.
But my understanding from Chris Gosland is that they would also be looking at the zone change. They would also be looking at the drainage. They might not be having formal comment, but because this would outlet into a core environmental feature, which is the Laurentian West Wetlands, that they would likely want to have some review or oversight.
Mr. Gross.
Through the chair, I'd just like to mention that there are two pieces to this. The first piece really is a zone change application, which is not being dealt with at this point. The second part is the application for a legal drainage outlet under the Drainage Act. And really, this is all that is being requested at this time is to create a legal drainage outlet. It is one of the conditions of the zone change application that was made for the property. Once a legal outlet has been established, then the zone change application would come forward and would proceed through its normal process, in which it would include public meetings, it would include comments from the region, from the GRCA, from all of the agencies that would be involved. So really what we're dealing with here is the simple issue, perhaps not so simple, but the issue of a drainage outlet from that property.
Okay. I guess that, we have the expertise at hand through our colleagues at the region, and I guess to me it's puzzling that we wouldn't have at least asked them about what their concerns would be. It's at no cost to us to find out what they would be seeing, what their concerns would be. When we're talking about, and I agree with Councillor Galloway-Seelock, it's concerning that we don't know what the communications have been between the developer and the smaller landowners here. When I look at this map, which I wish we had, and I'm glad that I asked the question of Ms. Cooper, and we got additional information, because otherwise we would have been making some of these decisions kind of blindly. When I was out there yesterday, there's quite a dramatic slope to that land. If we approve this Drainage Act, the engineer would have to be looking at, would we set the terms of reference, or would the developer who's paying for this set the terms of reference?
Through the chair, the consultant would be retained by the city with terms of reference developed by the city.
Okay, because I think that's very critical, because we'd want to be looking at such things like the 100-year flood and water quality and quantity and things like that. Councillor Galloway-Seelock asked the question with regards to the letter that Activa had sent to staff, and the wording that concerned me was, sorry, I just need to find that out again. Apologize. Oh, that a secure outlet when adjacent landowners cannot agree on a solution. So is this like a, no pun intended, but a last-ditch effort for the city to interfere in a stalemate situation?
I believe the procurement of a legal drainage outlet involves either being able to purchase an easement from adjacent properties over which the drainage would run, or purchasing the land over which the drainage would run, or through the Drainage Act being able to provide for a legal outlet. I'm assuming, perhaps I shouldn't, but at this point I'm assuming that the first two efforts were unsuccessful.
Okay.
Okay, so
can you? Your time is up. Can you buzz back in, please? Councillor Yaneski.
Yeah, I have a handful of questions as well. We've got two different maps here. Well, sort of two different maps. The map is just handed out, and the one that's in the staff report. And the information that I have here in the correspondence from Activa versus the staff report is rather confusing. So if we're talking about the subject property, we're talking on this one that's identified with red boundary, correct?
Correct.
Is that the property that's referred to in the staff report as the EB State?
That's the subject land in red on the map shown on page 9-2.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Sorry. On page 9-2 of the report,
Yeah.
there is a plan that shows the subject land in red outline. That is the same property.
That's the same property.
Correct.
So, is that a plan of subdivision according to the staff report, or is that a site plan according to the letter with Activa?
At this point, it's an agricultural piece of land.
That's correct. But you have an application with a T number, and yet you have a site plan application. Which one do you have?
To my knowledge, that there is an application for a zone change at this point, which has not yet come forward.
That's
Mr.
fine.
Wilmer? Sorry, I don't know why you... Oh, you got... Go ahead.
Through the chair, the short answer is no, this is not the EB Estate subdivision. So the 30T number that's referred to in the report is for the EB Estate subdivision, lands immediately south of the lands outlined in red.
The subdivision is to the south of the lands in red. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
And the site plan would be the subject lands in red on this map.
The subject lands are a zone change application. They're not yet a subdivision or a site plan.
Okay. There's also referred to in the staff report Susanna Street extension, and I have no idea where that is.
Sorry, I cut you off, Mr. Wilmer.
With the EB, within EB Street. Sorry, within the EB subdivision.
From the EB Estate to the subject lands would be a future street.
That helps me out. Where the subject property is on that, and the arrow is pointing for the drainage, is there an application for lands between the subject land and Peach Blossom Court? That's that area here.
Through the chair, not that we're aware of those. That is a wooded property, and while the owner has intentions to develop, we've never come to an agreement that whether the overriding planning documents would allow any development on that property. It's a natural area.
So there is an application, I'm sorry?
No, I'm not aware of any applications. There have been discussions, but not an application that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I was aware of discussions and something materializing, but I didn't know what stage that was, because my information is a few years out of date. So is there, in this area here, which we're looking to the general flow of the drainage in the northeast direction, any buildings on that property, on here? There's 2 or 3 landowners, as I understand.
Through the chair, in the supplementary information that's provided on Activa's letterhead dated August 22nd, there's a map on the very last page. The small black dots or squares are buildings.
I'm sorry, all what?
All the little
They
dots,
are buildings.
All the little dots on are buildings.
Where'd you get that map from? Okay, I got you. Okay, thank you. That helps me out a lot. And the lands, the 2 big blocks of property, which basically are in the where you got the existing culvert identified in here. Is the applicant intending just to have a drainage flow system, or is there an ultimate location for an off-site stormwater management pond? With drainage to go there.
The intent is for a on-site stormwater drainage pond within the property outlined in red, and for discharge from that pond to go in the direction of those flow arrows.
Okay, and I appreciate that. I figured that's a possible solution. So if that goes that way, there's a
Councillor Yaneski, can you buzz in? Your time is up.
Already?
Yes. Councillor Marsh.
Thank you. So, 2 questions. The first is, I want to just echo the concerns that have already been mentioned that we don't know which residents have been notified, and if there hasn't been an agreement reached, then I would like to hear from the owners of the affected properties where the drainage is heading towards. before making a decision. Do we have contact with the owners of that land, and would we be able to hear back from them?
Through the chair, we met with them on September 6th, and they had no concern with the process that was being proposed.
Do you have any indication from that conversation on September 11th, or September, whatever date, as to why there was no agreement reached then?
I have no information to that effect, since that was not the purpose of the discussion.
There's still some questions here then. So then my second question in a different matter is, are there other options other than having the stormwater pond drain out into someone else's property? Could there be a second stormwater pond, for example, that is the sort of overflow, or are there other options other than forcing a hand of other property owners?
Through the chair, the drainage essentially goes in the direction of that gravity flows, and the intent is for all the stormwater that's generated from a development site to be contained and to be managed within that site, and to be discharged in as natural a way as possible to avoid any negative impact to the ground or to the area which is outside of their site.
So then one last question about that. When you say in the most natural way possible to drain it out of that stormwater pond, I'm just wondering, what about the salt and or other contaminants that would end up being in that stormwater runoff? How would there be a filtration system, or what would happen to the water?
The stormwater pond would be required to contain both quality and quantity control elements. It would be a privately owned stormwater pond, since it would be a privately owned site, townhousing site, as my understanding is from the background information. The outlet would need to be, and this would be part of the design process, to minimize the impact on the lands outside of the site. In other words, instead of perhaps a single point of discharge through a pipe, it could be through a distribution pipe network. Having said that, the site itself would be required to have both quality and quantity control elements within their stormwater pond.
Thank you.
Councillor Gazzola.
I just want to go over this slow. Is it possible for them to deal with all their stormwater within the red line?
They would be dealing with all of the excess stormwater. In other words, there is currently water, if it rains, there is currently water that falls on that site within that red boundary that finds its way toward the northeast along the lines shown by those blue arrows.
Okay, so there's nothing that they can do to prevent that?
Correct.
And so they have to get in bed with somebody else?
Correct.
Yeah. If this area were all developed around them, would we be having these problems?
If the area were developed, there would be municipally owned storm sewer systems or channels or culverts into which the area would be able to drain.
So they'd have an outlet, and we wouldn't be here.
That's correct.
Okay, we're here because they want to move right away. They want to move before these other areas have been established. That's why
there is currently no municipal receiving outlet.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so now, from what I understand, we really have no jurisdiction over this. When this sort of thing happens, they can either get the agreement from the developers around them, or they have to go through this Drainage Act process. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah, so there's no, I mean, and the other thing is, this process does not cost the municipality any money. Any costs other than some limited staff time.
That's correct.
So this does not cost the municipality any money. We have no jurisdiction here. If we turn this down, from what I understand, it could go to an appeal body that in all probability will say, go back and deal with the Drainage Act. This is from what I understand. Is that a fair understanding?
I believe so, yes.
So we might as well deal with the Drainage Act now. That's the only jurisdiction we have. Is my thinking correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Davey.
Thank you. Councillor Gazzola touched upon my concern as well, which just leaves a single question, and that is whether the Drainage Act speaks at all to a non-decision of council. In other words, is there something that triggers if we defer it for too long a period?
Ms. McDonald?
Through you, Mr. Chair, if you defer for too long a period, the petitioner can file an appeal to the tribunal, and then the matter would be in the tribunal's hands, and they have the option of confirming council's decision or directing council to proceed under the Act.
And do you know how long that period is?
60 days.
Pardon me?
How long is the period that we have to make a decision?
Essentially, we're actually beyond the date as we speak. They filed their application in August of this year, but because of the election and timing, it wasn't possible to get this matter before council within the 30-day period. But because there's only one petitioner, they were willing to wait, and so really the clock has just continued to start new every day. And so you could argue that they're in a 30-day period right now, and if you don't make a decision in a short time frame, they could appeal you to the tribunal.
Okay, that changes things. Thank you.
Councillor Galloway Seelock.
Yeah, I have a couple questions and then a comment and possibly a motion. So if I heard you correctly, the legal drainage outlet has to come first before a zone change. Did I hear that correct?
That's correct.
Does that not make it look like something is going to change on that property? Like, is that not putting the drainage, assuming that there's going to be something different on that property and kind of prejudice the outcome of a zone change?
Through the chair, the legal outlet is a condition that staff imposed on the zone change application. And in order to even move the application forward, it's my understanding that that condition would need to be met. Once it's met, then the zone change application could move forward and take its normal course of action through public meetings and comments from all the agencies.
Why drainage before zone change?
Mr. Wimmer?
Through the chair, there's another perspective on this because Councillor Galloway Seelock's question is inferring that the drainage is the first question to be answered, the zone change is the second. Actually, the first question to be answered was the official plan, and the drainage is second. So first of all, the city's already taken a position that this land is residential land, and it is residential in the official plan. So then comes the technical aspects such as drainage and servicing, and then comes the zone change. So there is some logic to understanding whether or not the land can actually be developed before council makes a decision on the zoning.
Is that outlined in the report that the official plan, did I miss that in the report, that the official plan is
No, I don't believe
residential?
that was not included in the report.
Well, that might be an important piece of information in the future moving forward. to understand that, because that makes a little bit of a difference in my mind. Having said that, I know what Councillor Davey just asked, that the clock's already moving, deferral. I guess I look to not only Activa but staff, if we were to defer this just until our first meeting in January, if either staff or Activa for that matter has an issue with that. I can tell my rationale why, but I'd like to hear if staff have any concerns, and then I look to Larry and representatives for a possible nod if they want to.
Through the chair, I don't believe that staff would be able to answer that question. We would certainly be the applicant could take that and move forward with an appeal at any time. I believe the answer would be from the applicant.
Mr. Massio, do you care to comment on that so we can get some better clarification?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm a little unclear what the purpose of the deferral is at this point that you're asking Activa to agree to. Is there a particular reason for the deferral?
Yeah, and I can outline that. Sorry, I probably should have outlined that first. First of all, I'm looking from a resident perspective and making sure that I have the ability to contact the residents and understand from their perspective where they're at and how to move forward with that. And I think it would just give us an opportunity to feel better about the decision that we can make. Because in January, I may be perfectly fine to move forward with this process, but it's an uncomfortable feeling, first of all, dealing with it for the first time, not having been able to get that feedback from the residents, and as the ward councillor, not having been a party to these discussions. So that would be my rationale for having, it wouldn't, what date are we at? It's, I guess, close to a month more, if we could ask for that deferral just for...
Sure. Well, through you, Mr. Chair, I guess my request would be, is there any possibility that this could be dealt with over the next week before council meeting? In my experience, that is common place where consultations take place between committee and council's consideration.
Mm-hmm. And I can endeavor to do some of that work, but was just looking for additional time just because of the season that we're in. But if that's what you would prefer, I probably can look at that route as an interim, at least, if we can't get the information that we require.
That would be appreciated.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Mr. Massio.
So I know there's other questions, but at the appropriate time, I will move a deferral until the council meeting, with a caveat that if we can't get the information and understanding that we need, or that we have the opportunity to defer again, just with that understanding.
Very well. Councillor Yaneski.
There's some additional information I think we all need to know. I'm most likely aware of it, but the rest of the council may not be. The two subject properties that are to the northeast are designated under the official plan as special policies as well as the community plan, and they are very limited in terms of potential development. In fact, a good chunk of that land is all wetland. And the potential for development of it is either minimal or non-existent, depending on how you do the grading. So the potential for development could be extremely difficult. My question to the engineering staff would be that what would be the difference in pre-development versus post-development flow rates from the subject property onto the adjacent lands?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the proposed development has to meet post-development flow rates to so no additional runoff will come off that site. It all has to be captured on the private stormwater management pond. Okay,
appreciate that. Is that area to the northeast an ESP area?
Yes.
You got the lands on the other side of David Berge, right, which is the Laurentian wetlands is protected, but these two subject properties would be impacted too?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I confirmed with the GRCA last week that they are not a PSW area. They are a wetland, but they do not have a PSW classification.
That's different. That's, you're talking about PSW, but what about the ESPA?
Through you, Mr. Chair, they're not shown as an ESA.
I'm sorry,
Or an
can't hear you?
They are not shown as that.
Okay. I don't think it'll have a major concern because the lands really are very poor for potential development because they are wet right now. And if you're going to be controlling this, that would be fine. My question in terms of going through this whole process, is there, the flow that you're going to is the natural process, natural drainage gravity process as outlined by Mr. Gross, which is the logical way of doing it, unless you divert to another location. And I was just wondering whether it would go through maybe Peach Blossom Court, because it's could go easterly, but that's what I was asking, whether there was development potential on that to divert it, and that may resolve the problem. I don't know. But by going through this whole process, well, if we do give approval to it and you go through the Drainage Act process, there's an engineering report that will come forward. How much longer do we have to wait before that engineering report results come about?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I believe under the Drainage Act, once a decision has been made, we have 60 days to appoint the engineer to create that file, and then our best estimate would be it would take that engineer 4 to 5 months to create the report with the recommendations, and that includes consultation with the other agencies as well.
Okay, and if that report is prepared and goes through the process as you've outlined, then it comes back to council?
Yeah.
And then we will have to make a decision as to whether we accept the engineering's report as to what their recommendations are in terms of how to deal with this drainage issue. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that's right.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Fernandez? Sorry.
I really just have one more question, and then I have a. Do you want comments now, or do you want to go for comments after?
I don't want to make any comments. I want to go straight to the motion and then.
Okay. Is there really anything natural about drainage coming up off of an impervious area? Is there anything natural about that? I mean, really naturally, water filters into our fields and our valleys naturally. But what you were talking about, it's natural drainage from impervious cover. Like, what's natural about that? Isn't that unnatural? It's salt and sediment and oil and grit and, right? Is that not correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the flow leaving the site will be meeting in terms of quantity and quality the same characteristics as it exists currently. So the oil, the grit, the sediment, that will all be captured on the on-site stormwater management pond. They'll have to meet the normal level criteria that is required under the wetland for water quality. So the water leaving the site essentially won't be any more dirty than what it is existing.
Okay, and I apologize, I do have another question. When looking at the regional official plan, I'm seeing that there are wellheads and wellhead protection areas, and that this falls in within that designation. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'd have to confirm. I apologize. I don't have the region official plan in front of me.
Okay. My understanding from looking at the map and from communication with regional staff that this is within the wellhead protection area as under the regional official plan. I'm going to make my comment. I'm concerned that Councillor Galloway-Seeluck was not made aware of this in a timely fashion. I would support a deferral. I would actually support a longer deferral only because considering the time we're at here with holidays and Christmas, it might be difficult for her to connect with the residents. But given the fact that she said if she doesn't get the information that we should be allowed to defer it further, I think it's critical. This could have great implications on the residents accepting the flow from this development. I also feel that we're making a decision because the developer couldn't come to an agreement with the landowners, and so we're being asked to be that go-between, and I'm not comfortable with that either. It's no different than the number of times we have to deal with neighborhood issues and we say, you know what, this is a legal issue between you and your neighbor, and you need to go ahead and figure it out. So I don't appreciate us being put in the middle here, but I'm going to follow the ward councillor's wishes on this and support her and what she wants.
Councillor Marsh?
I would ask that if I could ask the representative from Activa, just if there's a possibility to share with us in the next week, leading up to the council meeting next week, any evidence of the go-between with the other landowners that would be affected, and that would help us to make our decision.
Well, that's up to them if they care to share that. What's that? She's asked, yeah. Go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair. The question then to me is, would Activa share the nature of the discussions between Activa and other owners?
Well, if it was email, or if there were notes taken, or any, like, just to understand, to show that there was indeed a discussion.
Has there been any questions to the abutting owners with respect to whether there's been any discussions between us? I'm sorry to be a little bit cautious, but what I can advise you of is that there has been a number of discussions between the abutting landowners representative and our company, and to date we've had no success in meeting any agreement in terms of how to move forward, thus the application before you.
So, okay, thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Massio. Okay, we have no further questions, so we'll call upon the motion that was brought forward, the deferral. All those in favor? Yes. All those in favor? Yes. That's correct. 1 week. Okay. All those in favor? Opposed? Okay. It's been carried. Well, that concludes Community Infrastructure Service Committee. Meeting adjourned.